welcome to my channel, Haylee Marie Vintage. Today we have a multi-piece project. This is part of my budget series showing you how to sew with a little less money. However, because I am smushing a ton of patterns together, we've gotten a little out of control on pattern costs. However, there are plenty of affordable patterns out there and even free patterns. I'm just gonna jump into explaining the project. I think each piece is gonna end up under $50, but the whole project itself will likely not end up under $50, which is usually my goal. But let's talk about it. First, with the fabric. This is some really beautiful fabric here that I thrifted. I don't know how long ago. I spent $2 on this. I'm trying to remember if this is part of that by the pound sale I go to, but I can't quite remember. But yeah, I spent $2 on this fabric. There is 2 7/8 yards. So we are going to be just barely getting by, I think, on this fabric. You know what I just realized? I was gonna do this skirt, but I just remembered I also have to be able to make the bib and the strap. So I think we're actually gonna have to change over to this petticoat pattern that I use all the time, which is gonna make it super cheap because I think I'm on like my 5th use of that pattern. So we will for sure keep this one under probably even like $20, just the jumper part. But let's talk about the bib pattern. I've used this bib pattern. I think this is my 4th or 5th time. I'm gonna have to figure that out. I use this bib because it's a detachable bib, so you get a lot of pieces that are mix and match with something like this. So my plan is to have just a plain, not quite circle skirt. I think it's technically a half circle skirt with then this bib guy here, and I think it'll be super cute. So that is the plan. I have decided on a very, very, very complex blouse pattern. This is Advanced 5253. This pattern was $25. That's gonna jack up our cost. But as you can see, it has like this shirred front with then I'm gonna do the long sleeves version here with a little collar. I think that'll look really cute with this jumper. It's gonna be interesting, that is for sure, because I'm not sure if these are a bunch of like elastic channels. I guess I should be able to tell. They must not be because the back has buttons up the back. So I'm really interested in this. This is going to probably be the more like star piece of the show. This will of course be really cute. I have made these patterns on the channel before though, so they're gonna look pretty familiar, as opposed to this guy here, which will probably feel pretty unique. For the fabric on that one, this is a white floral, like embossed, embroidered rayon situation. So it's nice because it has like the tiniest bit of stretch, which I think will be nice for a blouse like this. Like I said, we're not gonna get as low budget as I would prefer, but this should still be a fairly low budget project. I don't know, I'm like both really excited to sew. I've had 2 weekends off of sewing, so I'm really excited to sew in some ways, and others I just picked up a button donation to sort from the place I volunteer at, and I'm not gonna lie, all of me just wants to sort buttons this whole evening. So I'm gonna power through. I'm gonna real quick get everything cut out for this project, and then I will sort some buttons later tonight, and we will hopefully complete the jumper tomorrow and then the blouse on Sunday. So that is the plan. We're gonna hop to it. First, I'm gonna cut out the skirt. I'm a little nervous because basically the way these pieces end up, we have like the stripes are parallel on one side of my body and perpendicular on the other, and I don't know if that's gonna look cute or if it's not gonna look great, but I'm just gonna trust this process. This fabric's cheap enough that this is the perfect fabric to try this with and see how I actually feel about it. So that's what I'm doing here. I am gonna cut out these pieces separately because I need them to align perfectly. Usually I do cut all my pieces at the same time, but I want this to align perfectly, and I will also get the overall straps cut out to perfectly match each other and have the stripes go vertically on. For the waistband, I'm just cutting one long strip of fabric to just use as I need to. I need to make this skirt a little bit bigger. I don't want to do the math. I'd rather just have a strip that's a little bit too long. And then the bib is pretty straightforward. I am cutting this double, even though again I want the front and the back to match really well, but I feel like it just makes sense to double it up because the inside is technically aligning and shouldn't really show on the outside. And I have decided this purple stripe is what I want in the middle, and then all the stripes kind of radiating out from there. From there, I'm cutting out the pockets. I've decided to just get all the cutting width over, and I am cutting out the shirt. Since this is a size 14, it should fit pretty well, but I do need to cut it for French seams because I think this fabric will just work best with French seams, so I'm adding an extra 1/2 inch seam allowance for that. And then I have a lot of marks to transfer here because that is how we're gonna know where that straight line of different like shirring, smocking, whatever you want to call it, is gonna go across. And after that, I'm just cutting everything else out normally, again, leaving that extra 1/2 inch where needed for the French seams I'd like to do for this project. And here's your usual reminder that I do have both a Ko-fi and a Patreon where you can become a monthly supporter. I always really appreciate it, and you do get access to videos early as well as polls that help determine the direction of the channel. And now the last thing I have to cut is interfacing. I just need interfacing for the cuffs and then the buttons down the back. Oh yeah, and I did want it for the waistband of the skirt as well, for which I just used some math. First here, I'm starting with the darts. These are pretty straightforward. There's just 2 vertical darts, and what I'm doing to the non-lining, or the outside I guess, I am also doing to the lining, which in this case is the exact same fabric, cut the exact same way, so it doesn't super matter at this point which is the lining and which is the outside. And after sewing the darts, I get to iron the darts, and I'm so happy with how these are looking. I love how it brings that slight angle down the side of the pinafore top. From there, I have pinned both the sides of the pinafore together, and now I'm just going to go around the perimeter, and I will leave a hole to turn this inside out from. Before turning, I'm going to clip my seams and then push everything through the hole that I left open. I feel like no matter how big I leave these, they're never big enough, because I'm trying to leave them small enough to not be annoying, but large enough to turn from, and it's not ideal. And then from there, I just kind of threw my pokey out tool in there, shook it around until it found a corner, and then I popped out that corner with that tool to get everything nice and crisp. And then of course, once I was happy with how it was turned out, I pressed it. And then the instructions just tell you to go around and top stitch this. I believe it's 3/8 from the edge. I think it even recommended 4/8 from the edge, but I felt like that was way too much, so I went with 3/8. And with that done, I'm moving on to the straps as seen here. I'm going to again be sewing these and leaving a gap in the middle to turn them inside out from. Again, we are here with the trimming and the cutting corners and all that jazz. I just had a thought about where the phrase cutting corners came from. It could come from a lot of things, but it could definitely come from sewing. Anyway, back on to what I'm actually doing. I also clipped the seams fairly short here because I know I'm going to have to be able to put a buttonhole in here, and I don't want it to have to go through additional layers of fabric. And I'm again using that tool that I've dropped inside to get everything flat, and then I will press it all down. I'm quite pleased with these straps and the flower placement. I think it's looking really great. I'm first, before moving on to anything else, slip stitching those holes that I left on the straps closed. I often forget to do this if I don't do it right away, so I am doing it right now. And now with the bodice and the straps done, it is time for me to move on and focus on the skirt. The first thing I'm doing here is putting in the pockets. I like to put in my pockets what I call 70s style. This is usually how 70s instructions tell you to do so, where I'm going to sew them on with a small seam allowance separately to each side of the skirt, like you see here. And then once that is in, sew down the whole side skirt as well as the pockets all in one seam, and that seam allowance for that one will be like 5/8 or something like that, so it will mostly hide the pocket that is sitting in there. Also, I only have a pocket on one side, I want to note, because I planned on putting in the zipper in the other seam. And for this project, I decided to finish the pocket edge with zigzag stitching instead of just the pinking that I'm using for the other seams, because I just think it looks and works the best. But like I said, I'm going to use pinking to finish the rest of these seams. This cotton is pretty durable and tightly woven, so pinking sure will work perfectly for the edges of this. And then I'm of course pressing open these seams, and now I'm stitching in the zipper. This is such an easy zipper compared to my usual, since it is just a small 7 inches that I have to go down and around on. But I did have to make sure the placket, which is the thicker side that hides the zip, was on the correct side to be towards the front, so then it like goes back and you don't see it from the front as much. And now I can kind of focus on buttonholes. I'm going to pop in the buttonholes for the straps as well as for the bib, but I will need to wait to put that final buttonhole in the waistband of the skirt. The first step for that waistband is ironing on this interfacing. I just think waistbands work a lot better when they have a little bit more stiffness to them. And then I'm just pinning it all the way around. I don't know yet how long this waistband's going to be. I'm just doing it kind of by feel because I have that extra long tail. And as you can see here, I have actually folded and pressed the inside edge because that's eventually going to be what I top stitch down, and I felt like it would just be easier to have it pressed and ready to go. And once those are stitched in, I am then stitching the tabby tabs. So for the top one, that one is like flush with the end of the skirt, and then the other one has a little tab that pokes up that the button will sit on, so that way I can then button them together. Hopefully that sort of makes sense. Part of stitching that involved having Spooky take over what's left of the waistband. She was such a good, patient little cat and wore like a little scarf for a second, but then she was very much over it. She decided she needed scratchies from the camera, I guess. With this kind of wrapping up, I am putting fray check in all of the buttonholes to stop them obviously from fraying. And then with this snuggly needy cat, I am stitching on all of the buttons where they go. Spooky was feeling extra snuggly for the stitching down of the waistband. She just wanted all the kisses and headbutts and attention. And she very much endures through a lot of this project, still very snuggly while I open up all of the buttonholes with my seam ripper. Next up is the hem. I definitely miscalculated this when I shortened the skirt, so I only needed like a 1/2 inch of hem to get it to hit where I wanted. Ideally, I usually like to leave like 1.5 inches to 2 inches, so that way I can adjust the hem if I ever magically grow 3 inches taller. Just kidding. It's for if anyone ever owns it after me and they are taller. But in this case, yeah, my math was off, so we have a very small hem here. And here is Spooky again being the ever-patient cat while I hem the hem of this skirt before I will then move on to the shirt. I had traveled before this project, and I think Spooky missed me because she was glued to me for this project. It is now time for me to move my attention to the shirt. It is also the next day, and the shirt actually takes me, I think, 3 days to complete. 1 Sunday, and then the rest were times after work. But here, what I'm first doing before I get involved in all that jazz is I am ironing on the interfacing for the neck back, like where the holes are. There are also some tucks that are in the back, so I'm going to mark those before then pinning them and sewing them in. And then I am turning over the edge of the button placket by 1/4 inch, sewing that down so I can have a nice clean edge for when I eventually have that facing turned in. Next up, we're prepping for the gathering stitches. I am most nervous about this part in the process, not the marking, the actual gathering part. So what I'm doing here first is I am going to, with my water-soluble pen, draw the lines all the way across all the spots they're supposed to be. These lines aren't going to be particularly visible to you guys, although you'll see over in the corner I used a actual pen, like a goober. Other than that, you won't be able to see these. These are pretty light because I want to be able to just spray them out with a spray bottle. If you know, I hadn't made that one big error. And once I have that together, I am going to put in a basting stitch of 4.5 millimeters. I think the instructions technically said 4, but just with my machine and the way all this works, I thought 4.5 would be best. And what they ask you to do is do 1 line of stitch right on the line that you just drew, and then the other line, I believe it's 1/4 inch from that towards the top. And I'm having to put in, I think there's 5 lines of stitching, so 10 lines of stitching in this essentially. And then the next thing they have like this guide of a pattern piece that you're supposed to gather to match. So I've pinned the edges of this piece on like the armpit and all that, and I've also pinned it on the other side to my ironing board, and now I'm just kind of yanking threads and distributing gathers. The way they're distributed doesn't have to be final, but I am trying to get a good idea of what it looks like. There's a lot of reasons that they probably have you double stitch like this. I think it looks neater, but also it puts you at way lower risk for your thread breaking and having to start over, which would be such a pain. As I was doing this, I was not convinced I loved the way it looked, but I decided to persevere because sometimes you're wrong when you're working on a project and you start to doubt the process. Bear with me for some of the worst footage you're ever gonna see. Just kidding, I have really bad footage at least once a video. But here, what you can't tell I'm doing is I have sewn down the edges, and I am now prepping them for that French seam by actually cutting the edges smaller. This made me super nervous because I'm obviously cutting into those gathering stitches, and if the stitches didn't get picked up by my machine, this could easily come out. I'm actually hoping French seams also help with that because there's 2 lines of stitching that are more likely to hopefully catch that gathering thread. And with the side and shoulder seams French seamed together, I wanted to show you the hem. Here I am folding it up about a 1/2 inch because I just kind of feel the need to cut some length off. This is looking like a really long blouse. So I am going to, yes, do this about a 1/2 of an inch up instead of that 1/4 of an inch for a double turn hem. And then to keep that double turn hem nice and tiny and neat looking, I am then trimming off all of the excess fabric. I used to skip this step, but this makes such a difference in having a neat double turned hem. So don't skip this step if you feel like you're getting like a bulky, weird seam thing happening. This will really help improve that. And after that, I'm turning it over once again and just stitching that down, and now I have a nice tiny little hem at the bottom of this shirt. Now I'm moving up to the top where I'm actually going to bind the neck. I've already sewn the binding tape together. I sewed these right sides together, and then I am trimming down the seam so it will be super even before I then turn the binding tape over like once and twice to make like a little taco with the actual shirt in the middle as the filling. I don't know, maybe that's the right picture for you, maybe it's not, so sorry if it's not, but that's how I think about it in my brain. But to help in maybe the visual aid of this, after I have pressed the binding up, I am then pressing like a lip over, which you can see here. This is like similar to if you were gonna clean up an edge on a facing. And then after I have that pressed, I'm gonna turn it again and press it yet again, so that way that clean edge is over the inside of the blouse. And then I will pin those all down. And now it's time to focus on the sleeves. I am putting the interfacing on the cuffs here, and I'm trying to just include other parts of my life. For this day, I'm actually done with sewing because I have a friend coming over for dinner, and I promised to do some fun non-alcoholic beverages. And I saw a TikTok from, I think her name is Alex or Alexis. I'll link it down below if I can find it, showing her making simple syrup with lilac petals. So it's in lilac flavored, so I thought I'd give it a try. So I went and I picked up these lilacs at the farmer's market this morning because I have yet to find a place in Seattle where they're growing in like a public space that I can cut them. The first step is for me to just take off the flower part of all of these, which is what I'm doing right here. And then once that's done, you steep it in hot water like a tea and then make simple syrup. It was pretty yummy, so I think I'd recommend it. You might hear some cat purrs for the rest of this voiceover, but it is now a new day and I have cut the slashes in the sleeves where the cuff gets put in, and I am binding these cuffs. I'm doing this the way I saw it done on TikTok, where you just kind of like straighten the fabric on the bias tape, sew through it, and then you like magically fold it and it works. It was not a magic trick. It did work. I will probably do it like this again, but I do think it ended up creating a like less neat cuff cover situation than if I had done it kind of the normal vintage way, where it's almost kind of more like a dart in the way you do it. You've seen me do it the vintage way in other videos, and that is definitely the way I will keep doing it in the future. Here you can kind of see how like round that inside corner is as opposed to a really sharp point. But it was fine enough with me that I just went ahead and hand stitched down the binding. It's hard to tell with this fabric, but I am stitching this down on the inside. While I was enjoying the hand stitching, I am doing the inside of the neck around the collar here, which is that bias binding you had just watched me put in before I made the lilac simple syrup. And now I'm doing the French seaming of the sleeves, like making them whole, that side seam in the sleeve. Never know actually what to call that seam, but that's what I'm doing here. I'm doing that as a French seam, which is why you're going to see me sew something, get up an iron, and then sew a little bit more, and we will have some nice, neat, beautiful seams. I also sewed the cuffs at this point, so that's what you see me doing here, and I'm trimming those before turning them inside out and pressing them. And then I'm going to put in the gathering stitches both around the cuff and around the sleeve head, so that way I will be able to ease both of those in when the time comes. And here I am trying to evenly gather the sleeve into the cuff. This was kind of challenging. I feel like this fabric, because it was crinkly, was just kind of hard and weird to gather. So I don't know that I would work with a fabric like this again, because it just is kind of a pain for the fact that it's not my favorite texture. But I'm glad I tried it and persevered through this project. And then my last step of this sleeve was sewing the cuff down, and then I will see you again tomorrow. Spooky is continuing to be glued to my side, so it's kind of hard to see what I'm doing because I accidentally focused the camera, not even on her, but I guess on my scissors. But with a slight angle adjustment, you can see that I am attaching the buttons to the back of the shirt. I don't know why I'm doing that right now, but I just kind of felt like it. It is highly likely I was avoiding easing the sleeves. So that is what I'm doing here is I'm taking those sleeves, I'm making those gathering stitches, and then hopefully this will easily be set in and make a really nice looking sleeve. I am then stitching that sleeve in before yanking out all the gathering stitches. And then once that's done, I am finishing this unfinished edge with a bias binding. That is my preferred method for sleeves. Even though I did a French seam for everything else, this is just way easier than that. My weird last step for this one was putting in the buttonholes, and then of course I'll put fray check on them and cut them open, but I didn't do that part on camera. Usually I feel like I do these a little bit earlier in the process, but I felt pretty confident in my button marking capabilities, so I felt okay putting the buttons on before actually tackling the buttonholes. But with that, we're ready for the reveal. I hope you enjoy. Alright, you've seen the reveal for this one. I hope you enjoyed. I enjoyed going out and looking for the perfect flower to pose in front of. And trust me, I looked hard. I was not happy with my initial findings, so it took me a minute to find the spot for this reveal. But as always, we have a cost breakdown and then my final thoughts on this project. So first we'll hop into cost breakdown. I will warn you, this one is going to be a spicy cost breakdown because I am in a mood. In fact, today I opened my first meeting at work by saying maybe when I go to Cape Cod I'll get eaten by a shark and not have to be in corporate America anymore. So that tells you the mood I'm in. Seriously, I'm in a mood, and admittedly all I want to do is like go in my bedroom and cry for a hot minute, but I'm gonna try to keep it together. But you are in for a spicy cost breakdown. So for this cost breakdown, of course I have two items here. I have the floral blouse and the pinafore. The floral blouse I completely miscalculated and used an incredibly expensive pattern. So as a result, that is not part of this under $50 thing. Oh my god, did I delete? Hold up, I have to reprint this entire sheet. I'll be right back. I accidentally deleted all of my totals right before I printed it. Needless to say, it's a mood today. All right, we're back, I think. Yes, we're recording. I actually have the proper total for everything. But anyway, back to the fact the blouse did not fall under this budgetary rule. She was expensive to make because I just wanted to make sure I was making something that I felt like went with this pinafore. So we're gonna talk about the blouse first. For the blouse, I spent $38.43 on the fabric. It was a nice, more expensive textile. Anything embroidered is always gonna be expensive because not only do they have to produce the fabric, they then have to run the fabric through an embroidery machine, so that takes time and takes money. For the notions, I just used some thread and some buttons on this, 7 buttons to be precise. So that was $5.41, and then the pattern was super pricey, and I could have kept this under $50 if I didn't go for such an expensive pattern, but the pattern was $29.98. So yes, this blouse stayed very under budget at $73.82 to make. I do want to note, you could easily make a blouse like this and stay much under this budget if you used just a simple blouse pattern, and then you used essentially like a smock style of the like gathering pleats where you then just pleated it down and then you cut it to the size of the pattern piece. Hopefully that makes sense. Just look up like smocking process with patterns if you have no idea what I'm talking about. But you can 100%, you do not need any sort of pattern close to this. In fact, I don't think this pattern worked great for me, which we'll get into. I just want to emphasize that. And then as far as labor hours, this actually only took me 6 hours and 15 minutes. I'm going to get into my labor rant on the second go. But here on this channel, we talk about a living wage. And in Seattle, that living wage is $35.39. So we have a labor total of $221.19. So if we added it together, the pricing estimate for this blouse to pay me a living wage would be $295.01, which of course is wild. I would never expect someone to pay this for a blouse. This is not a one-to-one comparison of what a factory is like. If this was in a factory, they'd have a machine that could do that shirring effect at the front. It would take significantly less human labor. I just want us to think about human labor when we think about pieces, right? So I did find some comparisons, and we have super fast fashion, mid-level, and then slow fashion, similar blouses. For super fast fashion, I found a blouse that was similar for $15. That was then on sale for $10. I will note this was made out of polyester. It would not breathe, and likely it would not hold up in the wash the way this blouse has, which I actually have had to wash it because I'm a goober. The mid-tier range, this blouse was $89.50. Also made of polyester. I will note in this case it was, you know how a lot of those tier retailers, like I'm thinking like Ann Taylor, White House Black Market. Honestly, it's been so long since I've been in any of these retailers. I'm trying to think who else does it. I would say like Macy's in general, where you know how you never buy anything full price there because you know they rotate your sale. I suspect that they targeted selling this on sale for that $44 and have that $89.50 for those people who don't wait for the sales. But back when I shopped retail fashion, I definitely was the one who would wait for the sale to rotate around, so this would actually be $44 under that. The slow fashion brand that I found that was really actually very close to this blouse was $109 and made of linen. So that gives you some pricing ranges for what this would cost. Again, that mid-level and obviously ultra fast fashion are both likely not using ethical labor sources, and again are both polyester, which is a low quality fabric often. I mean, not always, but regardless, it is made out of fossil fuels, which is always something to keep in mind. And it breathes as much as a trash bag. Now that I've started to move to a pretty much all natural fiber since I make my own clothes, I've started to really notice how much polyester makes me sweat and also makes me smell bad when I sweat in a way that natural fibers don't. However, we still have so many polyester things floating around in our thrift stores and stuff. I do definitely buy it secondhand. I just personally don't, or try not to. I won't say not ever, because I do like to buy my leggings firsthand because of said sweat. But I try not to buy or buy as little polyester as possible brand new. Anyway, on to the Pinafore. The Pinafore is our actual budget piece. So I spent $2 on this fabric. I don't know where I picked up this fabric that I paid that for. I suspect it was a thrift shop. This is what I have noted in my notes from when I bought the fabric. So the fabric is the cheapest part. The notions were $8.74, and that's because we have a zipper, we have a ton of buttons. What else do we have going on here? I feel like I guess that's probably it, but that's enough to oh, the thread. I feel like this took kind of a bit of thread. Yeah, I guess it's the zipper and the buttons. I don't know. Now I'm doubting my math on this. But regardless, $8.74 is what I paid, I think, in notions. And then for the pattern itself, this is a pattern I have used a gajillion times, both the skirt and the bib. I have used the skirt pattern 4 times and I have used the bib pattern 4 times. So I divided what I paid for the pattern by 4. So this was a pattern total of $7.37. This Pinafore only cost me $18.11 to make. So again, you can find ways to do affordable sewing. I will say I do not find fabric I actually want to sew with every time I go to the thrift store. And speaking of that polyester, I don't think this is a poly blend. Often at the thrift store, I will pick up cotton poly blends because they're available, they're easier to find, and there's still high quality versions of that. And because it's secondhand, I feel fairly comfortable is a strong word, but I feel more okay buying something made of fossil fuels. But as far as labor, this only took me 5.5 hours to make, so pretty fast. I mean, I've made both these patterns a bunch of times. I'm actually surprised it took me that long to make it. I suspect it was just hand sewing. Honestly, I've also just felt less efficient, and I will will note for the cutting process for this skirt, it took longer to cut because I cut the pieces one at a time to make sure everything matched, which I think was very worth the labor, and it does cost extra money. You'll see in a lot of fast fashion and low quality clothing pieces that the stripes won't match, and it does look pretty odd. So again, we pay a living wage on this channel, and this is where I'm going to go into my big rant for today. You've been warned. I want to just like talk a little bit about why I talk about living wage, some of the context, and honestly some of the frustrations I'm hitting. So I talk about a living wage for a lot of reasons. One is that garment workers are incredibly abused and used by our clothing system, and that money is then funneled up to billionaires and just like people who don't work hard for their money and only make the money they make because they're willing to exploit and put other people into really, really, really terrible poverty working conditions. So when I'm talking about caring about a living wage when it comes to garment working, the reason I'm talking about garment workers on my channel is personally it's something I'm passionate about. I've done a ton of research on it, but also this is a sewing channel. It doesn't make sense for me to talk about mechanics or delivery drivers or airport workers or agriculture and all sorts of industries that are so key to us functioning and running as a society. The reason I don't talk about those specifically by name is because in this case I'm talking about sewing, so it only makes sense for me to talk about garment workers. But I want to be clear, I care about every working class worker making a living wage, regardless of what you do, whether you work in fast food, whether you work retail. I also just like get kind of in knots about like the idea of unskilled labor. I have personally yet to work a job, and I have worked service jobs that you can go walk and do the job with no training, like absolutely no training. There is no such a thing as a no skill job. The reason I'm focused about garment workers here is because this is a sewing channel. And the other reason that like I like to talk about this is I am not after fellow working class people. If you are working class, we're good, we're cool. I am not going to attack you. I'm not coming for you. Who I'm truly coming for is the billionaire class who exploits us. And they're not watching this. If you are watching this, you are not a billionaire. You are not a broke billionaire. You are not going to be a billionaire likely in your lifetime if you are watching this video. If you are a billionaire and you do watch me sew, wire me some money. I feel like people are thinking like I'm only talking like only garment workers deserve a living wage. I think everyone deserves a living wage, and not only do I think everyone deserves it, I work in financial tech. I know a lot about financials. I know a lot about how money moves through our systems. I factually know we have enough money for everyone to be paid a living wage. So like I want to be super clear on that. Literally everyone should get paid a living wage. And people could still be really, really, really rich if we were paid living wage. There would still be class differences. There would still be reward for being the person who take the risk. But like no one needs to live in poverty. No one on this planet needs to live in poverty. We have enough food to feed everybody. Like there's no reason for poverty. And I've been frustrated because I feel like I've just been getting a lot of comments where people are like, oh, thank God that I can buy fast fashion because otherwise we'd all walk around naked. And that's just like factually not true. Fast fashion is new as of the 80s. Last time I checked, we have been fully clothed for a very long time. It's just people repaired things more. They didn't consume as much. And I know I am such a hypocrite when it comes to consumption. You've seen my hauls. I am not a good example of consumption. I have scaled back consumption significantly in the past few years. I buy very little of my consumption brand new, but I am still working on my wiring as a consumer. So I am not one to talk about consumption, but like I do think it's important to acknowledge that like in the 50s and in the time periods that I'm sewing from, people didn't have 120 dresses in their closet like I do. They had like 10 to 20. They definitely did not have a ton of clothes because clothing has not kept up with inflation the way everything else has. So it is not true that without fast fashion we would all run around naked. I want to be clear on that. I also want to be clear, if you do buy fast fashion, I am not judging you. Unless you are spending $200 on Temu to have a bunch of clothing you're only going to wear a few months, I am not judging. I, Haylee Marie Vintage, am a hypocrite. I just bought a whole bunch of Hanes underwear. Those were definitely not made under good conditions. And so I am not going to judge you for buying fast fashion. All that at right now, what I'm asking you and what I'm feeling frustrated on is if you don't give a about garment workers, don't tell me. Don't tell me you don't give a Just move on. I leave this cost breakdown very, very, very labeled and separated from everything else. So if you don't want to hear this, if hearing this makes you uncomfortable, you don't have to. You don't have to watch my content. And like, you don't need to tell me that you don't care about these other people. I don't need to know. I think that's where I'm starting to hit some frustration is like, if you don't care about fast fashion and you don't care about garment workers, just don't tell me. I don't need to know. I'm just gonna block you. That's where I'm at. You can disagree with me. That's totally fine. I just like don't need to hear you tell me you don't care about other people. And I don't say that like as a moral judgment. We all have different things going on in our life. And again, I am an incredibly flawed individual. I have and continue to use Amazon. There's all sorts of inequitable systems I contribute to. I work in financial tech. Right, I am not here to throw stones. But like, if you don't care about garment workers and you are thankful you have access to fast fashion, that's great. Keep it to yourself. That's all I'm asking right now. If you don't care about Palestinians, keep it to yourself. If you don't care about what's going on in the Congo, keep it to yourself. Like, you don't need to tell me. And that's kind of where I think I'm drawing my line is, if you don't care about the things I care about, that's fine, but you don't need to tell me. Yeah, if you don't get value out of this, don't watch it. This is not my livelihood. I don't care if you watch my content. I'm just having a lot of feelings because the past few weeks I've been getting bombarded by people who are mad at me speaking up about stuff. This is like my virtual living room, and if someone was rude to me in my living room, I'd ask them to leave. So if you're rude to like me or like blatantly are wanting to like start arguments with me, you don't need to be in my virtual living room either, is just like where I stand. Long rant to get to the fact that, again, this took 5 hours and 30 minutes. We're multiplying that by 39, and that is a labor total of $194.65. Sorry, one more thing. The other thing that I'm talking about, these prices, this like estimate that I'm giving you, this $212.70 that I would need to charge for this to be a living wage for me, this is a hypothetical. I just want us to start thinking about what things would cost if we paid people fair wages. I know this is idealistic. I know it's not practical. I know it's not how businesses work. Again, I work in venture capital and private equity. I know how business runs. Like, you don't have to tell me. I just like, again, because I see all the like money that's just sitting around in these powerful people accounts, I promise you that there is enough to feed and take care of everybody on this planet. So that's like where I'm coming from. And I was gonna apologize for being angry, but I'm not sorry for being angry. This matters to me. I care about these women. I care about these delivery drivers. Like, I care about these people, and I don't give a flying fluff about these companies' profits. I don't think you need to have exponential profit to have a good business, to have a good company. I think a good company cares about their employees, cares about the environment, and wants to leave a legacy that isn't global warming and war. So yeah, like I said, I'm having a day, and sometimes that day spills out to you guys, but this is my channel, this is my content. I can say what I want, and I can block who I want. But I did look for comparisons to this Pinafore. I found one super similar for super cheap fast fashion for $35. Seemed to be about as cheap as you could get. This is, again, for a fully polyester piece. When we start to step into, again, this mid-tier range, this company for sure I know uses questionable ethical practices when it comes to both sourcing things, specifically their cotton and their labor, but they have a piece, again, almost identical for $98. I will say, I guess, almost identical. None of these, the bib detaches. That's like a unique feature that you don't see that often. And this one was 65% cotton, 30% polyester, and 5% spandex. It's so funny. I could not find a ethical brand that had this exact silhouette, but I feel like I found things reasonably close when I look at the steps it takes to make it. This one was out of linen and would set you back $234. So mine at $212.76 sort of makes sense. I'm trying to think, do I have anything else I need to rant about, or can we move on to the final project wrap up here? I know I'm not perfect, and I know the way I say things isn't perfect, and I know it's sometimes grating, and also I know it's uncomfortable to hear that what you're buying is produced off of really unethical things. Like, it doesn't feel good to hear that, and we are stuck in a system where no matter what you do, there is going to be unethical things in your consumption. I just truly believe that we should do our best to invest in our communities, think about what we buy and how it impacts other people, and not buy from companies that are caught using slavery. If you need to buy fast fashion to survive, that's fine. I am not going to fault you for that, because if you need to buy fast fashion to survive, I am positive you are not the person doing Shein or Temu hauls every other week. I'm like 90% sure that you're not that person. If you can barely afford fast fashion, I suspect you aren't buying gobs of it. When I'm talking about people who like consume gobs of fast fashion, we're talking about actually fairly wealthy people and middle-class people with income similar to mine. And that's where I'm just kind of like, I am a human putting myself out on the internet. It is not comfortable. It is not natural. The reason I do it is I want people to start thinking and talking about these issues. Someone who is diametrically opposed to me is never going to agree with anything I say in this video. However, I do think there's plenty of people who I've just taught to think a little differently. I'm not asking you to like turn your world upside down because it's not sustainable. Like, for example, I'm trying to move towards eating less meat. Cold turkey is not the way I'm going to eat less meat. So I have different rules and different steps for trying to cut meat. I can't ever do completely out of my diet. I know that's like not for me, but I've been trying instead of cutting it. Like, you have to figure out what's actually going to work for you to make those changes, is I guess what I mean. I'm not going to go into the details of how I'm weaning off of meat. It takes time. It takes practice. Like, for me, I've been doing this for years. I have been buying secondhand since I was like 16. And so like, I just have a lot more experience and ability to do that than someone who's just starting out. And it's small steps. I'm not asking anybody to completely upheaval their life, except for billionaires. I think you guys could donate a lot more money and not be rich assholes. Billionaires, I do ask that you change, and that you change rather quickly. But everybody else, it's just taking our time, and it's just being intentional. I need to move on from this cost breakdown, but I hope you bore with me. Whatever. I hope you can live with me. I hope you don't hate me. If you do hate me, don't let me know. Again, if you don't like something, scooch along. You're not changing my mind about a living wage, and I'm not changing your mind about a living wage. So let's just scoot. That's kind of one of my other things, is I actually think arguing comments on the internet is not how anybody changes anybody's mind. I don't really engage in it most of the time. Most of the time, if it's something I feel like I have to argue with someone, I'll just block them because it's like not worth my time and my energy. And like the only reason I feel like I'm this worked up is because I've just gotten like kind of a bigger bulk of these than usual in the past few weeks. But like normally, honestly, I'm pretty clear-headed and I'm feeling actually a lot better already. I think I'm just like feeling better by like ranting and vomiting and talking about. We'll see what I even keep in. It's challenging because like I feel like because of the way I look or like the things I make, people see me as like this sanitized piece of creativity. And like creativity is never sanitized. Creativity is dirty. It's dirty and it's grimy, and like it comes from a lot of feelings. Like I've talked about it, when I sew, sewing is a huge part of how I cope with my everyday life, with my anxiety, with my depression, with all my feelings. Like I can just get out of my head and sew. If I didn't care about these things, if I didn't get upset about these things, I'm like 98% sure I wouldn't have this channel. I wouldn't sew. I wouldn't get to teach people about sewing. Because like I know people don't watch the ends of these videos. I can see that most people drop off and most people don't care for this content, and that's okay. I don't ask that everybody agree with me. I don't ask that everybody like me. I don't ask that you like my voice or like my mission or anything like that. I just ask that if you don't, you keep it to yourself. I don't tell a coworker when I think their outfit is ugly, you know? So take that kind of energy and run with it. But anyway, for final thoughts on this project, for this guy, she's perfect. I don't really have any thoughts on this Pinafore. She's a bit snug. My measurements have definitely changed. I've definitely added about 1.5 inches to my waist since I last measured. So I need to do a full body remeasuring and rebalance my measurements for all my future projects. It is a little bit frustrating. I'm really sick, not of like gaining weight because I'm gaining weight. I'm just sick of changing sizes constantly. I was just trying on stuff from last summer that I made and it already doesn't fit. And it's just exhausting and it makes me like not want to make things. So I just need to relook at my measurement chart, check everything. And I think I need to really start thinking about how I'm going to sew where I can gain 1 or 2 inches and be able to just adjust my clothing, you know? I will say I adore the way these stripes fall. I was not sure about using this pattern for a stripe. I thought they might look weird, but the way they cascade around my body and kind of wrap, I think is really beautiful. So I have no complaints. And this one, yeah, I don't have much to say because I've made both of these patterns 4 times. This blouse, however, I have a lot to say about. I do not think this looks particularly fantastic on me. I feel like the gathered front like kind of cuts weird across my chest. I think it will be super useful for when I wear it under pinafores or things like that, where that line is not as apparent. I think I will still really enjoy this piece. I don't even know if I'm going to keep this pattern. I do like the neckline and some of the options. I just like don't feel like the way they do the shirring or the gathering really works for me. So I think that's something that I'm going to be weighing. I wore it today and I can definitely tell either my sunscreen or my makeup got on the inside of it and it's looking real gross. I have already washed this and I guess I will probably be washing it again. It washed really overall pretty well. I didn't even need to iron it, which is great. Yeah, I think it's just mainly the shirring in the front that I don't love how it looks. But again, I think for what I made this for, which I really made this for a layering piece and not to be worn alone, I'm still happy with the result. And I'm glad I know that now, and I didn't like try this with a fabric that wasn't supposed to be a layering piece, you know? Sometimes makes just don't turn out exactly the way we want. And that's part of the creative process and sewing and learning. And I guess as our wraps up this video, thank you for those of you who have still stuck around. Thank you for sticking through my rants. I try to just like speak what's from the heart and what's from the mind. I don't know if people know this. I don't script anything. The idea of scripting what I'm gonna say makes me wish for that shark attack again. Everything's from the heart, everything's off the cuff. I know I just went on a big angry rant, but I do want to say I really appreciate my core audience. I appreciate all you here. And I also really appreciate anytime I pick up new people. I always say I'm here for the quality, not for the quantity. Definitely feel like my channel reflects that. So if you tolerated this or maybe even enjoyed it, I definitely would recommend subscribing and stick around. I post every single Friday at 8 a.m. Pacific time. And then if you want to go above and beyond and support me on Patreon, feel free to do so. I do like to note, please don't support me unless you are in a really good financial place yourself. I don't want anybody struggling to support me. I'm doing okay. And I still keep all of my content available to everybody. The only exclusive content that you get by being a Patreon is you get to be the people to help vote on polls to steer some of my project directions. For example, with this blouse, I felt pretty intimidated by this pattern. I put it up as an option. A lot of people voted for it, so I did it. So if that is appealing to you, definitely subscribe to me on Patreon. But again, don't feel any sort of pressure to do so. And then, of course, there's the free ways to support me by giving this video a thumbs up, commenting down below, not using ad blockers. And I will see you next week. Bye!